Millionaire marries a rebellious girl on a bet, shocked to learn. She's a virgin on their wedding night. Welcome to Mr. Carter Stories. Get ready for a world filled with intense romance, shocking twists and heart-pounding suspense. If you love billionaire dramas, enemies to lovers, and stories packed with secrets, passion, and revenge, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Mr. Carter Stories, where love meets war, on fire. The air inside the exclusive Blackwood lounge was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and aged whiskey. Laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses filled the dimly lit room as men in tailored suits indulged in reckless wagers, each one trying to outdo the other. At the center of it all sat Ethan Blackwood, a man whose name carried weight in the world of power and wealth. He was ruthless, untouchable, and utterly bored. Tonight, though, something had piqued his interest. Aria Lawson. She was the talk of the town, the woman who refused to bow to social norms, who lived by her own rules, who walked through life as if the world owed her nothing. With piercing green eyes, dark waves that tumbled past her shoulders, and a smirk that screamed defiance, she was everything men like Ethan avoided. Too wild, too unpredictable, too much trouble. And yet, here he was, fixated on her. Across the room, Aria stood near the bar, clad in a leather jacket over a sleek black dress, her combat boots tapping against the marble floor. She laughed at something her friend said, tossing her hair over her shoulder, completely unaware of the dangerous game being played just a few feet away. Ethan swirled his drink, his lips curling into a smirk. A woman like that can't be tamed. "Bet you couldn't marry her," drawled Daniel Crestwood, a fellow tycoon who thrived on high-stakes challenges. He leaned forward, eyes glinting with mischief. "You think you can control everything, Blackwood? But her, she's untouchable." Ethan raised a brow, amusement flickering in his sharp gaze. "You think so?" "I know so," Daniel shot back. "You like your women predictable, polished, trained. Aria Lawson is a damn wildfire. She'd eat you alive." Ethan let out a slow chuckle. "I don't lose bets." "Then prove it." Daniel set his glass down with a soft clink. "Marry her, tame her, and keep her." Silence stretched between them as the other men at the table leaned in, waiting for Ethan's response. A dangerous glint flashed in his eyes, and before he even thought about the consequences, the words left his mouth. "Done." A collective murmur rippled through the group. Some laughed, shaking their heads, while others simply watched, waiting for him to back down. Daniel smirked. "Then you better get started." Ethan exhaled slowly, downing the last of his drink before rising to his feet. He walked toward Aria with the confidence of a man who never lost. The moment she sensed his presence, she turned, her gaze locking onto his with a mixture of amusement and mild irritation. "Blackwood," she said smoothly, lifting her glass to her lips, "to what do I owe this pleasure?" He leaned against the bar, tilting his head. "I have a proposition for you." Aria arched a brow, feigning interest. "Let me guess. A business deal? A charity gala invitation? Sorry, not interested." "Marry me." The words were spoken with such casual arrogance that for a moment Aria thought she misheard. Then she let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Excuse me. You heard me." Ethan's expression remained unreadable. "I want to marry you." Aria stared at him, trying to gauge if this was some kind of twisted joke. But Ethan Blackwood wasn't known for jokes. He was known for winning. "Why the hell would I do that?" she asked, crossing her arms. Ethan smirked. "Because I'm the only man in this city who could handle you." A dangerous silence settled between them. Then, slowly, Aria's lips curled into a smirk. Game on. She tossed back the rest of her drink and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there with an unreadable expression. He should have been satisfied. He should have been smug. But instead, for the first time in his life, Ethan felt something unexpected. Uncertainty. Because Aria Lawson didn't react the way he expected. And that meant one thing. She had a game of her own. The price of saying yes. Aria Lawson had never been one to back down from a challenge. When Ethan Blackwood, the arrogant billionaire who thought the world bent to his will, had asked her to marry him, she'd said yes without a second thought. Not because she wanted to, but because she needed to. She had seen the flicker of surprise in his eyes when she agreed so easily, as if he'd expected her to slap him instead. That alone made her want to smirk. Men like Ethan thought they controlled everything, but they didn't control her. Not yet, anyway. She sat in her small apartment, staring at the contract Ethan's lawyers had sent over. The crisp white pages practically screamed Blackwood property in expensive ink. A year. And that was the deal. A marriage that would last exactly 1 year, with appearances at social events, a public life together, and an unspoken rule. No real emotions involved. But Aria wasn't afraid of that. She was afraid of something much worse. A cage disguised as a marriage. Ethan Blackwood thought this was his game, but Aria had been playing her own long before he entered the picture. She glanced at the burner phone on the counter. The last message still lingered on the screen. "You're running out of time, Aria. Say yes, or I'll make the choice for you." A cold shiver ran down her spine. She had no other way out. This fake marriage, it was her escape. A shield against the past that refused to let her go. Marrying Ethan meant protection. His name alone was enough to make them hesitate. And for now, that was enough. So she picked up the pen, her fingers shaking only slightly as she signed her name. Aria Blackwood. It looked like a mistake, a warning, a deal with the devil himself. And maybe it was. Ethan's rules. When she walked into Ethan's office later that night, she found him behind his massive oak desk, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He barely glanced at her as she dropped the signed contract onto his desk. "You didn't even read it, did you?" he asked. "Does it matter?" She shot back, arms crossed. His lips twitched. "Not particularly." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. My assistant will handle your schedule, wardrobe, and public appearances." Aria snorted. "Wardrobe? Let me guess. High heels, expensive gowns, and a smile that doesn't reach my eyes." He smirked. "Something like that." She hated how easy he made it seem, like this was just business. "You're taking this well," he mused. "Most women would ask questions." "Most women wouldn't be in my position," she replied, meeting his gaze without hesitation. For a second, his expression flickered, like he knew there was more she wasn't saying. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. Ethan stood, grabbing his suit jacket. "We have a dinner event tomorrow. Be ready by 7. And just like that, the conversation was over. No warmth, no questions, just cold, calculated control. This was a mistake, cracks in the facade. As the wedding date neared, Aria tried to ignore the way her nerves twisted. She told herself it was just a year, a means to an end. But the closer they got, the harder it became to pretend. Because for all of Ethan's arrogance, he wasn't just some heartless billionaire. He noticed things, like the way she flinched when certain phone calls came in, or how she tensed when someone mentioned her past. And the worst part? He was starting to ask questions. The devil always collects. 1 week before the wedding, Aria received another message. This time there was no warning, just a photo. her old apartment door slightly ajar. The words underneath made her blood run cold. "Your time is up, Aria." She gripped the phone, her chest tightening. Ethan Blackwood had no idea what he'd just married into, and if she wasn't careful, neither of them would make it out alive. A picture-perfect illusion. The grand Blackwood estate was bathed in golden light, the sprawling gardens transformed into a scene straight out of a fairy tale. White roses cascaded down marble archways, and crystal chandeliers hung from towering silk-draped canopies. The elite of high society had gathered, eager to witness the scandalous union that no one had seen coming. Ethan Blackwood was marrying Aria Lawson, and the city was buzzing with speculation. Would she ruin the ceremony? Would he regret this reckless bet? Ethan, standing at the altar, exuded effortless confidence in a custom black tuxedo, his sharp gaze scanning the crowd before shifting toward the entrance. He wasn't nervous. He didn't do nervous. But then the doors opened, and Aria stepped in, the rebel in white. The moment she appeared, a hush fell over the crowd. Aria Lawson was a storm in human form, wild, untamed, and unapologetically herself. But tonight, she looked like something out of a dream. Dressed in a sleek, form-fitting ivory gown, the fabric clung to her curves like a whisper of silk, its delicate lace sleeves adding an air of deceptive innocence. Her hair, usually rebellious and untamed, was swept back in loose waves, a few strands framing her face. A single diamond necklace gleamed against her collarbone, a Blackwood heirloom Ethan had insisted she wear. But what struck him the most wasn't her beauty. It was her expression. Her green eyes were unreadable, her lips slightly parted, as if she were holding back words she dared not speak. She walked with slow, measured steps, but Ethan could see it. The tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled around her bouquet. Something was wrong. She looked like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, preparing to jump. And for the first time since this ridiculous wager had begun, Ethan felt something stir in his chest, a sliver of unease. The vows and the lies between them. When Aria finally reached him, she lifted her gaze, meeting his head-on. Her fingers were ice-cold when he took her hand. "Nervous," he murmured under his breath. She let out a soft, hollow laugh. "You have no idea." The officiant began speaking, but Ethan barely heard a word. He was too focused on the woman standing before him, on the way her lips quivered when she was asked to repeat the vows. "I, Aria Lawson, take you, Ethan Blackwood." Her voice wavered, so soft it was almost lost in the hush of the crowd. Ethan's grip tightened slightly around her hand, a silent warning. "To have and to hold, for better or for worse." Her breathing hitched. "Till death do us part." She said the words, but her eyes told a different story. Ethan slid the wedding band onto her finger, the cold metal feeling heavier than it should have. She hesitated before doing the same for him. Just for a second, just long enough for him to notice. Something was wrong, and he was about to find out exactly what. A kiss that tasted like secrets. "You may now kiss the bride." Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached for her, one hand sliding to her waist, the other tilting her chin upward. Aria flinched. It was so subtle that no one else would have noticed. But Ethan did. His lips brushed against hers, and in that moment he felt it. The raw, unspoken fear in the way she barely kissed him back, the way her fingers curled slightly into his sleeve as if she needed to steady herself. She was hiding something, and it wasn't just wedding day jitters. The applause erupted, but Ethan barely heard it. His mind was racing. Who the hell had he just married? The shock that no one saw coming. The reception was in full swing, guests clinking glasses and murmuring about the unlikely match, but Ethan Ethan was watching her. Aria stood by the balcony, her fingers grazing the stem of a champagne flute she hadn't touched. The golden glow of the chandeliers reflected in her eyes, but she wasn't seeing the room. She was somewhere else. He moved toward her, his presence a quiet but undeniable force. "Are you going to tell me what's wrong, or should I start guessing?" Aria stiffened, but her expression didn't change. She was good at pretending. Too good. "Nothing's wrong, Ethan," she said smoothly. "We're married. Isn't that what you wanted?" His jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." She turned to face him fully, her green eyes daring him to push further, and then, just as he was about to demand the truth, a loud crash echoed through the hall. The doors burst open, and a man stormed in, his eyes dark with rage. The entire room froze, and then, in a voice dripping with venom, he growled, "You married him!" Ethan's entire body went still. Aria's face drained of color, and in that moment, as the weight of the situation settled in, Ethan finally understood one thing. This wasn't just a bet. This was something else entirely. And Aria Lawson had just brought war to his doorstep, a night meant for passion. Or so he thought. The grand Blackwood estate loomed in the night, its towering presence a symbol of wealth, power, and control. Ethan Blackwood had expected this night to be like every other conquest, a game he had already won. Instead, something about this woman, his wife, felt entirely unpredictable. The drive back from the reception had been eerily silent. Aria sat beside him in the sleek black limousine, her fingers clutching the delicate lace of her wedding gown. She hadn't said a word since that man had crashed the wedding. Ethan had handled it swiftly, dragging the intruder out before the media could spin a fresh scandal. But the look in Aria's eyes had haunted him. It wasn't just shock, it was fear. And now, as they stepped into the bedroom, their bedroom, Ethan felt the weight of something far heavier than desire settle between them. The moment that the door clicked shut. The room was vast, illuminated by the flickering glow of the fireplace. The enormous four-poster bed, draped in silk and velvet, stood like a battlefield waiting for the inevitable war. Ethan shrugged off his tuxedo jacket, rolling his shoulders as he turned to face her. Aria stood frozen near the door, her hands gripping the fabric of her dress so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Are you going to stand there all night?" he asked, his voice smoother than he felt. She blinked, shaking herself out of whatever daze she was in. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "I need a moment." Ethan narrowed his eyes. A moment? He had never known Aria Lawson to hesitate, let alone look like a cornered animal. "You're nervous," he observed, taking a slow step toward her. She sucked in a sharp breath but didn't move back. Instead, she lifted her chin, forcing a smirk onto her lips. "And what if I am?" Ethan stopped in front of her, reaching up to trace a loose curl away from her face. She shivered under his touch. His gaze darkened. "This isn't you," he murmured. Aria let out a breathless laugh. "You don't know me, Ethan." He tilted his head. "No," he agreed, "but I know fear when I see it." The confession that changed everything. Silence stretched between them. The tension was thick, charged, but something about it felt wrong. Aria exhaled shakily, her hands gripping her gown even tighter. Then, so softly, he almost didn't hear, she whispered, "I've never done this before." Ethan stilled. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, crashing over him with startling force. He let out a slow, measured breath. "What do you mean?" She clenched her jaw, avoiding his gaze. "I mean exactly what I said, Blackwood." Ethan wasn't often caught off guard, but this stunned him. Aria Lawson, the woman with a reputation for being reckless, untamed, and impossible to control, was a virgin who had just married him in a business deal she had barely fought against. 100 questions ran through his mind, but only one felt important. Why? Her eyes snapped to his, and this time they weren't filled with fear. They were filled with fire. "Because men like you only take," she said, her voice laced with something raw. "And I've spent my whole life making sure no one ever took from me." Ethan's chest tightened. This was more than just innocence. This was a defense, a shield she had spent years keeping intact. And yet she had let him put a ring on her finger. She had agreed to be his. So why? A decision made in the dark. Ethan took a step back, raking a hand through his hair. He had imagined many scenarios for their wedding night, but this changed everything. Aria's entire body remained tense, as if she was waiting for him to demand something from her. He exhaled sharply. "Go to sleep, Lawson." She blinked. "What?" "You heard me." He grabbed a glass of whiskey from the bedside table and sat on the edge of the bed. "You want to fight? Not tonight." Aria's lips parted in shock. This wasn't what she expected, not from him. She hesitated for a long moment before finally stepping out of her heels, her body still rigid as she moved toward the other side of the bed. When she slipped under the covers, her back turned to him. Ethan watched her, and for the first time since meeting her, he realized he wasn't just intrigued by Aria Lawson. He was completely, irreversibly tangled in her mystery, and he had no idea if he'd survive it. The morning after Ethan Blackwood had never been uncertain about anything in his life. He built his empire on calculated risks, ruthless decisions, and a firm grip on control. But this woman sleeping in his bed, curled on the farthest edge as if she were waiting for an escape, she was an enigma he couldn't decipher. Aria Lawson was supposed to be reckless, unapologetic, a woman who lived by no rules but her own. And yet, last night she had trembled under his gaze. Why the hell would a woman like her still be untouched? And more importantly, why had she agreed to this marriage in the first place? Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair as he stepped out onto the balcony. The cold morning air did little to settle the unease curling inside him. Something wasn't adding up. He needed answers, and he wasn't a man who liked waiting. A breakfast of questions and lies. Aria sat at the long dining table, staring down at her untouched plate of food. The estate staff had laid out an extravagant breakfast, fresh fruit, warm croissants, steaming coffee, but she could barely swallow past the weight in her throat. Ethan was watching her. He had been ever since she walked in, his sharp blue eyes scanning her every movement. It was unnerving. "Eat," he finally said, voice low and even. She picked up her fork, mostly to avoid his scrutiny. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee. "Are you going to tell me the truth, or do I have to drag it out of you?" Her grip tightened around the fork. The truth about what? His gaze darkened. "Why you agreed to marry me?" Her stomach twisted. She had expected this. She forced a smirk, hoping it looked convincing. "Maybe I just wanted to see if I could tame the infamous Ethan Blackwood." His expression didn't change. He wasn't buying it. "You're lying," he said smoothly, setting his cup down. "You're a woman who doesn't play by the rules, yet you agreed to be my wife in a deal that benefits me more than you. That doesn't add up, Aria." She rolled her eyes. "Maybe I just like expensive things." He let out a humorless chuckle. "Try again." Her chest tightened. He was too damn perceptive. She pushed her plate away, standing abruptly. "Believe whatever you want, Blackwood. This marriage is just a contract, remember?" She turned to leave, but before she could take another step, Ethan was on his feet. In one swift movement, he grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward him. Her breath hitched. His touch wasn't rough, but it was firm, a silent warning. "You're hiding something," he murmured, his voice dangerously soft. "And I don't like secrets, Aria." She yanked her hand away, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "Then maybe you should have married someone else." Her scars. She couldn't hide. Aria didn't stop moving until she reached the sanctuary of her bedroom. Her heart pounded as she locked the door behind her. She couldn't let him get too close. Not now. Not ever. She walked toward the mirror, pulling off the silk robe that draped over her shoulders. Her breath caught as she looked at her reflection. The scars were still there, faint but visible, thin white lines tracing across her lower back, a reminder of a past she'd spent years trying to escape, a past that had almost broken her, a past that Ethan Blackwood could never know about. She let out a shaky breath, gripping the edge of the vanity. This marriage wasn't about love. It wasn't about trust. It was about survival. And if Ethan kept digging, if he got too close to the truth, then she wouldn't be the only one trapped in this marriage. He would be too. The questions that wouldn't leave Ethan Blackwood had built his empire on knowing everything about the people around him, their weaknesses, their motivations, their fears. Yet his own wife remained a mystery. Aria Lawson was more than what she pretended to be. She played the role of a rebellious woman, untamed and uncontrollable, but underneath that, there was something else, something darker, something that didn't make sense. She was a virgin. She had flinched when he had touched her, and the way she'd looked at that man at the wedding, pure terror. Ethan couldn't ignore it. He wouldn't. So he started digging. A name that shouldn't exist. Ethan sat in his study, his fingers drumming against his desk as he waited for the call. His private investigator was one of the best in the country. If there was something to know about Aria, he would find it. The phone rang. "Ethan," the investigator greeted. His voice clipped. "You were right. Something's off." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What did you find?" A pause. Then, "The name Aria Lawson barely exists before 5 years ago?" Ethan stilled. "What do you mean?" "There's almost no record of her before that. No school history, no family connections, nothing. It's like she appeared out of thin air." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. That wasn't possible. "That's not all," the investigator continued. "I found something disturbing." Ethan's breath slowed. "Tell me." A sharp inhale on the other end. "She was linked to a man named Victor Calloway." The name sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Victor Calloway was a ghost story in the business world, a man whose name was whispered behind closed doors, a man known for making people disappear. Ethan had crossed paths with dangerous men before, but Calloway was different. He wasn't just ruthless, he was a monster. And Aria had been connected to him. The woman who hid in plain sight. Ethan found her in the library that night, curled up in a chair with a book in her lap. She didn't look up when he entered. "You've been quiet today," she murmured, turning a page. "That's unlike you." Ethan studied her. She was good at pretending. Too good. "You knew I'd look into you," he said, voice unreadable. Finally, she glanced up. A slow, knowing smirk curved her lips. "Of course you did." He took a step closer. "You were connected to Victor Calloway." For the first time, her mask slipped. It was quick, just a flicker of something in her eyes, but Ethan caught it. Fear. Then, just as fast, she covered it with a laugh. "And lots of people are—" His jaw tightened. "Not like this." Silence. Then, "Drop it, Ethan!" His patience snapped. "No!" She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Then you're going to regret it." Ethan grabbed her wrist before she could walk away. "Try me." She didn't fight his grip this time. Instead, she whispered something that made his blood run cold. "If you dig too deep, you won't just regret it." Her voice was barely audible. "You might not survive it." The stranger who knew too much. Ethan Blackwood wasn't easily rattled. He had faced ruthless businessmen, liars and backstabbers. He had played the game of power his entire life and always won, but nothing had prepared him for this, for the man standing in his office, for the way Aria had frozen the moment she saw him. The stranger leaned against the doorway, his smirk lazy, but his eyes sharp. "Well, well," he drawled. "You finally caught yourself a husband, huh, Aria?" Ethan's gaze flicked to Aria. Her face was pale, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Not anger, not annoyance, fear. Ethan straightened, his entire body coiled with tension. "Who the hell are you?" The man ignored him, stepping closer to Aria instead. "Did you tell him why you really married him?" His voice was mockingly sweet. "Or are you still playing pretend?" Ethan had heard enough. In a heartbeat, he was in front of Aria, a protective wall between her and the intruder. "Start talking," he ordered, his voice dangerously low, "before I make you." The man's smirk widened. "Relax, Blackwood. The name's Daniel Reed, and I'm just here to remind my dear friend that she's running out of time." Ethan didn't move, but his mind was already calculating. The name meant nothing to him. But Aria's reaction? That meant everything. She had gone stiff behind him, completely silent. "Leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel tisked, shaking his head. "Come on, Aria. Don't be like that." Ethan had enough. In a blur of movement, he grabbed Daniel by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "Explain," he hissed. Daniel let out a breathless chuckle. "You really have no idea, do you?" He flicked his gaze toward Aria. "You didn't tell him?" Aria refused to look at either of them. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Tell me what?" Daniel grinned. "That she didn't marry you for the bet." A beat of silence, then, "She married you to protect herself." Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. He turned his head slightly, his gaze locking onto Aria. "Is it true?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. That was answer enough. The woman who lied. The room was suffocating. Ethan let Daniel go with a shove, his mind reeling. Aria had played this game from the start, but not for the reasons he thought. He had believed she married him because of the bet, because of her reckless nature, because she wanted to challenge him. But it had never been about that. It had been about survival. Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Who are you running from, Aria?" Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "It doesn't matter." His voice hardened. "The hell it doesn't." Her hands trembled at her sides. "Ethan, please, just let it go." He let out a humorless laugh. "You really think I can do that? After this?" He gestured toward Daniel. "You married me because you needed protection. From what?" She hesitated. Daniel let out a slow exhale. "From Victor Calloway." The room turned ice cold. Ethan's jaw locked. That name again. He turned back to Daniel. "Explain. Now." Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Aria was supposed to belong to Calloway. Ethan's blood ran cold. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," Daniel said, "that she was promised to him. A deal was made, and she ran." Ethan's pulse pounded. "Promised?" His gaze snapped to Aria. "Tell me he's lying." She didn't. She couldn't. Ethan clenched his fists, his entire body vibrating with a mix of fury and something far more dangerous, the urge to kill. Because if what Daniel was saying was true, then his wife wasn't just trapped in this marriage. She was hunted. A line crossed. Ethan didn't trust easily. He had spent years building walls, keeping people at arm's length, ensuring that no one had the power to hurt him. But Aria, she was different. She was a puzzle he couldn't walk away from. A woman who had lied, manipulated, and hidden secrets that could burn his entire world to the ground. Yet he couldn't stop himself from wanting her. And that was the most dangerous part of all. Because now he wasn't just protecting her out of obligation. He was protecting her because he couldn't stand the thought of losing her. A moment that shouldn't have happened. The storm outside raged, rain lashing against the windows of the Blackwood estate. Inside, the tension between them crackled just as violently. Aria stood by the fireplace, arms crossed over her chest. "So what now, Ethan?" He watched her, his gaze unreadable. "Now, you tell me the truth." She let out a bitter laugh. "You already know the truth." "You married me to keep yourself out of Calloway's hands," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "But what I don't know is why you didn't tell me from the start." She hesitated, just for a second. And in that second, Ethan saw something beneath her mask. Guilt. "You wouldn't have helped me," she whispered. "Not if you knew the truth." His jaw clenched. "You don't know that." Her eyes flickered. "Don't I?" Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, she said, "I was scared, Ethan." Something inside him shifted. He never saw her afraid. Aria Lawson was the woman who laughed in the face of danger, who threw herself into chaos without hesitation. But now she looked vulnerable. And he hated that he wanted to erase that fear from her eyes. Without thinking, without planning, he closed the distance between them. Her breath hitched as he cupped her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "You don't have to be scared anymore," he murmured. Her lips parted, eyes searching his. And then she kissed him. Or maybe he kissed her. Either way, the moment their lips met, the world tilted. A fire that shouldn't have been lit. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was raw, desperate, a war between two people who should have been enemies. Aria's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer when she should have pushed him away. Ethan's grip tightened on her waist, devouring every inch of her that she was willing to give. For the first time since this twisted marriage began, there were no lies, no bets, no secrets, just fire. But fire was meant to destroy. And the moment they pulled apart, Ethan knew something was wrong. Gone. The next morning, Aria was gone. Ethan woke to an empty bed, the scent of her still lingering on the sheets. His heart slammed against his ribs as he pushed out of bed, his mind racing. She wouldn't have just left. Not after last night. Not after that kiss. Then he saw it. The shattered glass on the floor, the overturned lamp, the faint trail of blood smeared on the wall. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. She hadn't run. She had been taken. The moment, everything changed. Ethan Blackwood had always believed he was untouchable. He controlled everything, his business, his wealth, his power. But in one brutal moment, he lost control. Aria was gone, not because she ran, because someone took her, and Ethan had a feeling he already knew who. Victor Calloway. The name sent a chill through him. He had heard whispers of Calloway's cruelty, the way he made people disappear without a trace. Now he had Aria, and if Calloway wanted her this badly, then she was worth more than Ethan had ever realized. A message in blood. The Blackwood estate was in chaos. Security combed through the property, searching for any sign of how the intruders got in. But Ethan already knew the truth. They had been watching, waiting, and now they had what they came for. A sharp knock on his office door made him turn. One of his men, Gabriel, stepped in, face grim. "Sir, we found something." Ethan followed him to the grand staircase. His stomach twisted when he saw it, a single red envelope, lying on the marble floor, placed there deliberately. Ethan knelt, picking it up. The wax seal had already been broken. They wanted him to read it. He unfolded the letter. One sentence. "You took what was mine. Now I'm taking her back." Ethan's blood ran ice cold. The truth he never saw coming. Ethan's grip on the letter tightened as he stormed into his study. His mind was a storm. Flashes of Aria's fear, the way she had begged him to stop digging, the warnings in her eyes. She had been trying to protect him, not because she didn't trust him, because she knew Calloway would come for her. And now, Calloway knew exactly where she'd been hiding. Ethan slammed his fist against his desk. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was war. And if Calloway thought he could just take Aria and walk away, then he didn't know who the hell he was dealing with. The one thing he couldn't ignore. Gabriel stepped into the room, hesitating. "Sir, there's more." Ethan turned. "What?" Gabriel handed him a file. "We kept digging like you asked. We found out why Calloway wants her so badly." Ethan's hands were steady as he opened the file. Then everything stopped. His eyes scanned the documents, the photographs, the names, and then he saw it. A marriage contract. Not theirs. One dated 5 years ago. Between Aria Lawson and Victor Calloway. Ethan's breath left his lungs. She wasn't just running from Calloway, she was already his wife. A choice that would change everything. Ethan Blackwood had always believed love was a weakness. He had built his empire on logic, power, and control, never emotions. But now he was ready to burn the world down for Aria. The woman who had lied to him, the woman who had betrayed him, the woman who had never really been his to begin with, yet none of it mattered, because she was in danger, and he would kill anyone who stood in his way. The offer that could ruin him. Ethan didn't wait for Calloway to send another threat. He went straight to the source. The underground club was filled with dangerous men, men who killed for money, men who ruled the shadows, and Victor Calloway sat at the center of it all. Ethan stepped into the room, his presence a silent declaration of war. Calloway smirked, swirling a glass of whiskey. "Well, well, look who finally decided to stop playing house." Ethan's voice was ice. "Where is she?" Calloway chuckled. "You really think you can just walk in here and demand answers?" He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "She belongs to me, Blackwood." Ethan's fists clenched. "Not anymore." Calloway exhaled a slow, amused breath. "You don't get it, do you?" He reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "This contract says otherwise." He tossed it onto the table. The marriage contract. Ethan stared at it, his pulse roaring in his ears. Calloway smirked. "You bet on her. I own her. The difference between us? You played for fun. I play to win." Ethan didn't blink. "You think this piece of paper gives you power?" Calloway's smirk deepened. "It gives me the law. You take her from me, and you'll be hunted, Blackwood, not just by me, but by every man who has something to lose in my empire." Silence. Then Ethan smiled, a slow, deadly smile. "Then I guess I'll have to destroy your empire too." Calloway's smirk faltered for the first time. Ethan stepped forward, his voice dark. "You don't own her anymore. And if you touch her again, I will make sure you don't own anything ever again, including your life." Calloway's jaw tightened. "You really willing to go to war over her?" Ethan's gaze was ice cold. I already have. The battle begins. That night, Ethan moved his entire world into motion. His men, his money, his power. Calloway had made one fatal mistake. He thought Ethan would play by the rules, but Ethan Blackwood didn't follow rules. He rewrote them. By morning, Calloway's bank accounts were frozen. His business deals were collapsing. Every connection he had built over decades was being ripped apart, piece by piece, and while Calloway fought to save his empire, Ethan went to get his wife back. The war for Aria, the abandoned warehouse, was heavily guarded, but Ethan wasn't alone. His men moved like ghosts, eliminating every guard in their way. And then he saw her, Aria, tied to a chair, bruises marring her skin, but her eyes were still fierce. "Ethan," she whispered like she couldn't believe he was really there. He knelt, cutting the ropes from her wrists. "I told you," he murmured. "You don't have to be scared anymore." A single tear slipped down her cheek. "You shouldn't have come." But Ethan only smiled. Too late. A gun cocked behind him. "Touching," Calloway's voice sneered. "But it ends here, Blackwood." Ethan slowly turned, standing between Aria and the man who had haunted her past. Calloway's gun was steady. "You walk away now, and I'll let you live." Ethan exhaled. "You still don't get it, do you?" Calloway's eyes narrowed. Ethan smirked. "You already lost." The second he said it, gunfire erupted outside. Calloway's guards were falling, his empire was crumbling, and for the first time, Victor Calloway looked afraid. Ethan didn't hesitate. One swift motion, and he knocked the gun from Calloway's hand. A single punch sent him to the ground. Ethan didn't stop. Not until Calloway was bleeding, gasping, broken. Not until he knew Aria would never fear him again. The end of a war. The beginning of something else. They left Calloway behind, left him with nothing. Aria didn't speak until they were safe, until they were miles away from the wreckage of her past. Then softly, "Why did you come for me?" Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Because you're mine." She exhaled a shaky breath. "And if I don't want to be?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then I'll just have to make you want to be." And when she didn't argue, didn't push him away, Ethan knew this was never about a bet anymore. It was about love, war, and revenge. And he had won.